ever broken their site by changing CSS? Okay, I hear a little laughter there. So this is the problem. You're working on your CSS, and you make a change in your mobile menu, and you test it at 320 pixels, and it looks great. And so you're done with it, right? But then you go back and someone says, it's not working on my iPad 1. And you look at it at 600 pixels, and it's completely broken. So it's very easy, whether you're doing CSS or you're doing just the HTML structure of your page, to have small changes here up in your menu or whatever have unintended effects that you're not looking for and you don't expect and you don't see until, unfortunately, someone who's looking at your live site complains and says, hey. Sometimes it's your boss and sometimes it's one of your customers, but either way, it's not that fun. And if you've done programming or development, you're probably familiar with the idea of a regression. A regression means this thing used to work, I changed something else, and now this thing doesn't work anymore. So what we're talking about is visual regressions, where you change the layout or the style of your page, and something that used to look right doesn't look right anymore. So you change something here, you break something there. That's basically the problem. So what's the solution? Is this the solution? Anytime you change something here, you have to look at all of the theirs. How many theirs are there? You have hundreds of pages on your site. You have multiple resolutions you're supporting. You have multiple browsers you're supporting. And your pages can be pretty big if it's a long content page, if something you've changed up here breaks your footer. So this is my attitude to that. It's just not sustainable to do that. So how do you make sure that you're capturing the things you need to capture and making sure that you're not breaking things? Well, there are lots of tools that you can use to make sure that you're not breaking things. I'm going to talk about 3 kinds of tools, and they're sort of in increasing order of how much technical detail you have to know in order to take advantage of them. So there are emulators that you can use to detect cross-browser issues, and a lot of them are very fancy. The one I'm going to show is Browser Stack. There are tools you can use to generate automatic before and after and other comparisons. So you can compare a known good version of your site, take a screenshot of it, compare it to, say, a development version of your site, and do a diff. And all of this is automatic. You just basically say, run the test, and it'll show you if anything's changed. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is integrating this kind of thing into a full test suite. Is anyone doing any kind of automated testing suite on their products? Websites? Not yet. Okay. So that's the last thing we'll talk about is some ways to get this integrated. So the first thing I want to look at is Browser Stack. And Browser Stack allows you to view your website as it appears in many different operating systems, resolutions, and browsers. So this screenshot here is an example of Browser Stack starting up a virtual machine in the cloud, all those buzzwords, right? That is going to show you what your site looks like in iOS 7 on an iPhone 5. So let's take a quick look at that. Browser Stack is a paid service. Our team actually pays for it. They do have a free trial if you want to take a look at it. But one thing that's kind of nice about it is it has a browser extension where you can be on any site, like let's say this one, and you open up Browser Stack and you can say, okay, show it to me in IE11. And then it goes through this starting in real time, wah. And then once it's finished loading, you are seeing exactly what someone using this browser combination would see. And it's a little slow sometimes. And you get this nice little handy doohickey here where I can say, I want to see it in a different resolution, and it'll pop up in a different resolution. And you can interact with the page, and you can follow links and take a look at your website, which is pretty cool. You can also use this little switcher tab doohickey, say, oh, well, I actually want to look at what's the latest Mac doing? What is it like to use Safari on the latest Mac? And after the pretty picture is done, you'll see what it looks like in Safari on the latest Mac. So this is really cool. Sometimes you see the guts of the virtual machine working in a way that you don't expect. But anyway, here's how it looks on the Safari on the latest released version of OS X. So what tools like this, and there are more than just Browser Stack, but this is the one we happen to use. What they allow you to do is, without having to have all of these different machines and browsers with the different operating system versions, you can just use this and it'll generate a virtual one for you, and you can poke around and take a look and see any resolution you care about, any device or operating system or browser combination that you care about. And that's very cool, and it's very, very useful. But there's some things that you don't get when you use a tool like Browser Stack. Unless I have two windows open at once, I can't actually compare anything here. This is just live, you know, what my site looks like right now. I could, if I wanted to, open up another Browser Stack window and then like toggle back and forth between them and eyeball them. But really, that's not all that efficient. So this is one of the things that Browser Stack is good at, but it's not gonna, off the bat, give you any comparisons. So, demo number 2, I'm gonna show you a tool that you can use locally. And the screenshots here are a demonstration of the output you get from this tool called Wraith. So what you're seeing here is that I'm testing my news page. I'm testing it at 320 pixels. I have a screenshot that's called local, which is my local development site. I have a screenshot called Pantheon, which is my live site. It's actually a test site, but whatever, I'm calling it my live site. And then an automatically generated image that shows you, it highlights the difference between the two. So everything that hasn't changed is sort of washed out and grayed out. And everything that has changed is highlighted in blue. So let me switch over to my terminal here. So does anyone here use Ruby? Whatever. Okay, so I don't actually develop in Ruby, but I have Ruby installed locally, and Wraith is a Ruby gem, which is essentially a packaged Ruby application that you can download and use. And it's packaged in a way that it manages its own dependencies, really. So let me switch over to my commands here. In order to use Wraith, you're going to need Phantom.js, which is a headless browser driver. Does anyone want an explanation on what I mean by a headless browser driver?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so a real browser is like Firefox, and it has a rendering engine, Gecko. Chrome has a rendering engine, which is WebKit. What Phantom.js does is, instead of you opening a browser, Phantom.js emulates what the browser does by using the rendering engine. So Phantom.js can drive a real browser, but mostly what we use it for, or what I use it for in this case, is just using the rendering engine, and it renders it and allows you to capture a screenshot of it without actually launching a browser. So Phantom.js is one, there are others. ImageMagick is what creates the diff between the images. So ImageMagick is a graphics handling tool. As you can tell on the Mac, I find it most convenient to install Phantom.js and ImageMagick with Homebrew, which is a Mac sort of, package manager. And then gem install Wraith is the Ruby command to install Wraith. And then the first time you run Wraith, you run the setup command, and there's an optional setup Casper command, which I'll show you what that does. And then you're ready to go. And all you do really is, with Wraith, you don't have to program. All you have to do is configure. So let's take a look at the default configuration file for Wraith. Oh, I don't have it. Okay. if I run Wraith setup, no, I don't know where we're at. So you run the Wraith setup command, and it creates a default configuration file for you, and it creates a JavaScript file that is the controller for running the browser. You don't have to edit the JavaScript file at all. You can do everything you need to do just by editing the configuration file. So you run that command, and then I'm going to show you my first file. This is in a format called YAML. I think it may stand for like yet another markup language, but it's a standard text format that people use to manage configuration. So you have these key value pairs that say, here's the headless browser option. I'm using Phantom.js, which uses the WebKit, so Chrome-like, Safari-like. There's another tool called Slimer.js. These are all named after ghosts. That uses Gecko. So if you wanted to run it with Firefox, you could use Slimer.js. You have a snap file. This is the JavaScript that runs the test. You have a directory where to put your screenshots. And you have two domains that you're going to check. I have one called old test, which is my known good version, and then new dev, which is my development version. Then I give it a list of screen widths that I want to capture. And then I give it a list of paths that I want to capture. And so those are the things that you have to configure. You need to tell it, where do I put the screenshots? What domains am I checking? What screen widths am I checking? And what paths am I looking at? And that's all you need to configure for Wraith. The rest of the stuff, fuzz is useful because there can be finicky little differences, particularly in font handling and anti-aliasing of the way things look like on different platforms. And this will help work around that. Threshold 5 means how much of a difference is considered a failure. I never mess with those. So here's my first Wraith test. And so in order to run it, the command, let me get back to my little script here, Wraith capture, and then you give it the name of your configuration file. So from your Wraith directory, you go Wraith capture BDUG starter. Live demo, what could possibly go wrong, right? So and what it does is it creates the folders, and it sort of tells you what it's doing. It's snapping these websites, and these are Pantheon sites, so I hope they're awake, that they haven't gone to sleep. Otherwise, it'll be I'll have to wake them up and run it again. Pantheon test sites and dev sites will go to sleep after a little bit. So it tells you what it's doing, blah, 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 blah. Has some diffs, generates thumbnails, and it says failures detected. So just clear that. What it does for me is it nicely generates a little gallery that I can open. Based on where I tell it to put the screenshots, it generates a gallery file. And I can just open that and look at it. And wow, look at that. My dev site is on the latest code, and my test site is not. So what the diff shows me here is that, wow, it looks really different. And I can actually click on this thumbnail and see a screenshot diff of the entire page. And if I want to, I can clicky on this one here and see this screenshot, and then look at this screenshot, captures the whole page at 320 pixels. So as you can probably tell by looking at this diff, most of the difference is caused by the fact that my little header thing across the top is taller in one than in the other. So this is a very useful thing to know, that, oh, look, my header is taller. Maybe you intended that, maybe you didn't, but here you see it. But there's a bit of a problem in here in that most of this screenshot is noise for that reason, right? Now I happen to know that the only real difference is at the top, but it looks like the entire page is totally different because of the way it pushed things down. The whole thing is a diff, right? And if you have like an automatic threshold that says, oh, this % difference is a failure, you might trigger a failure on a page that's not actually a failure because you have content that is of different heights, or the difference is at the top of the page and it pushes everything down. So what are you going to do about that? Well, there is something you can do about that with Wraith. Let me show you another option here. You can use Wraith in combination with yet another JavaScript library, which is called Casper.js, to capture just one chunk of the page. And the way you do that is by giving it a CSS selector. So you can say, just show me the header, just show me the footer. And so in order to do that, you have some slightly different options in your configuration file. So here's my configuration file that's going to demonstrate this. I tell it that I'm using Phantom.js, but I want to use it with Casper.js. When you install Wraith, it will install Casper.js for you. So there's nothing particular you have to do with it. You just have to give it, in addition to the Wraith setup command, you give it the Wraith setup Casper command, and similarly, it will generate default generic configuration in JavaScript for you. So if you take a look at this, I have a different directory. I'm still looking at the same domains, the same widths, but in my paths section, for every path, I also have a selector. And this is a CSS selector, just as if you're writing a style sheet rule that says, give me the header element with the ID of header, and then you have some style rules for it. That's what you put in here for the selector. Everything else is the same. So instead of capturing BDUG starter, I'm going to capture BDUG selector. And again, we'll wait for a little bit while it's running. Does anyone have any questions while this process is running about Wraith or Phantom or anything?
Will you post your aside notes? So, you know, your
Yeah.
text file somewhere there.
Yes, I'll post the text file. I'll add it to the Drupal.org, groups.drupal.org. I'll add some notes to it. Also, this is being screencast, so that'll also be posted. So there's more failures detected, and if I do, let's open the gallery, this gallery. So if you look at the screenshot here, that captured just the selector. So if I'm only interested in the header, I only capture the header, and I see the diff. This is also useful if you have pages with dynamic content. For example, let's say you have a news feed in your sidebar that displays different news articles. Whenever they turn up, you have an automatic feed. So if you capture the whole page, that'll be a diff that you don't care about. So you can use this kind of thing here to just show you the selectors that you actually do care about. And if I wanted to, I could then, oh, look, I see some differences in the header at 1024px, tiny, 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 tiny differences. But if I care about them, I know that they're there. So that's Wraith plus Casper, which again is a JavaScript library that when you install Wraith, it'll install the Ruby version of it. Does anyone have any questions about trapping selectors or anything like that? Okay. So there's another cool thing you can do with Wraith, which is that you can look at, oh yeah, Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, just catching up with you. Trapping selectors. So can you, could you capture the whole page and exclude just certain selectors? Can you look at?
Yes, but not using Wraith with Casper. You probably need either Phantom CSS or WebDriver CSS to do that. And I'll be talking about Phantom CSS later.
So the approach with Casper would be you just run it a bunch of times and like say you needed 3 sections.
Sure. Yeah. You may be able to do it with Casper. I didn't get it to work that way. What you can do is the Casper.js file is the default generic controller file. You can add your own JavaScript there and do things. Like you could add some JavaScript that would hide a certain selector and then take a snapshot of the page. So, and you can do that by, you add your own JavaScript file, and then you say, hey, before I capture the screenshot, run this JavaScript. And then you can issue all kinds of commands. I found that fussy and hard to work with. So the way I'm going to demonstrate that is using Phantom CSS. So another thing you might want to do is you might not have two sites to compare. What if you only have one site? What if you want to compare what my site looks like today with what it looked like last week? You can do that as well with the, I'm just going to type this in so you'll see all commands. Can everyone see that relatively okay? Should I bump up the, let me bump up the size a little bit. Okay, so here are the a list of Wraith commands. Wraith history, if you have it configured correctly, will snap a baseline of a site. And then it saves those screenshots. And then when you run Wraith latest on the same configuration, it will snap not two different domains, but the same domain with its current state compared to its history. So I have a configuration file for that, which is this BDUG history here. The differences in configuration is I have to give it two directories. I have to give it a directory to store the baseline, and that's the history directory. And then my regular directory where the comparisons are saved. And I only give it one domain. It's not comparing two domains, it's comparing one domain against the other. And so what I have to demonstrate this now is I have a local site which has a different design. And, you know, this is 2 versions ago, or actually I took a baseline that was 2 versions ago. This is the latest version, and we're going to run a comparison and see what it looks like. So I'm going to sort of caveat in advance that some of these fake headless browsers are not very good with web fonts. For example, they don't display typekit fonts very well. And if you're using the Berkeley brand look and feel, we have this font here is a special font that is loaded from typekit. And so it's sort of hit and miss. Sometimes the screenshots fail, and sometimes they don't display the font correctly. So there may be some false positives here. But later on in the session, I'm going to talk about how to get around that problem. So I've already set up my baseline, so I'm just going to do Wraith history, BDUG history, and it'll go snapping at everything. Okay. So I'm gonna, really? Oh, I just broke it by issuing the wrong command. Sorry, we won't see any differences. But Wraith history captures the baseline. I actually already had saved a baseline, so oops. We may not see any diffs, but I'll just we'll see what happens here. So this is actually running the comparison. So the first thing it does is it takes my saved screenshots and brings them into the directory what's going to run the comparison. So basically, the only way we'll see a difference now is if it had a problem with web fonts. So not as happy as I wanted.
Basic
But
question: where in the YAML file did you restrict it to the page or pages that you want this to be looking at?
Yeah, that's the paths. So
Okay,
yeah,
I see it.
yeah.
Are there any nuances about this that make it Drupal? You know, any Drupal-ish nuances that we need to know about, or Pantheon nuances?
Pantheon nuances, if your site is asleep, it might not wake up in time to capture a good screenshot. So if it's not an issue for live sites, but if you're running dev and test sites and doing comparisons, just wake it up. Drupal, no, there's nothing Drupal specific about this. You could use it for WordPress, for static sites, for anything. Okay, so yeah, you can tell that there were some issues here with the screenshots failing because of the web fonts not rendering and basically breaking the JavaScript. So it's a pain. But you can tell that I'm comparing the latest to the historical version, and because I did the wrong thing at the beginning, there's no difference, no effective difference there. So does anyone have any questions about this baseline stuff? Okay.
Is there a way to store multiple baselines?
Yes, you would have to just have multiple history directories. So let's go back to this configuration file. What you would probably want to do is have a different configuration file for each set of baseline shots. So you would have a last week.yaml, a last month.yaml, or a version 1.yaml, version 2.yaml.
If there isn't any way you can kind of automatically cycle through and kind of snap once a week and then pick the one you want to use?
You would have to script that. Yeah. So, and anything that you would want to use to script it, you know, it's basically just you're running a command line command. You can script that however you want. You could automatically generate your configuration files. And one other thing I want to, let's see. So you see here that there's this data.txt. Data.txt, let's see if there's any, yeah, the 320. Yeah, I can't even see what I'm doing here. Anyway, you can do things programmatically with those text files. Those text files capture percentage difference and what's changed and that kind of thing. So this generates some artifacts that you can use in your programming if you wanted to automate it even further. Any questions about Wraith? Because we're about to move on from Wraith. All right. So one thing that is a problem with Wraith is that, you know, if you're using the fancy menus like the gateway site does, you have to interact with the page in order to see them. You can't just snap a screenshot and say, hey, you know, because it's hidden, it's not shown on the page. So what you really want to be able to do is to interact with the page before you take a snapshot. It's very useful to be able to say, hey, go to this page, click on this thing, wait for it to load, then take the snapshot. Because otherwise, there's no way to tell that you might have a difference here in your menu. And it is theoretically possible to do this with Wraith and Casper and JavaScript, but it broke in many different ways when I tried to do it. I think it requires a more recent version of Casper than is available for Ruby. So what I'm going to switch to now is a few friendly ghosts. For some reason, all of these things are named after ghosts. I don't know why. So on the left, that's Phantom.js logo, which is the headless browser that uses WebKit, so Chrome-like and Safari-like. The middle guy is Slimer.js, or Slimer.js, and that's the headless browser that runs Gecko, so Firefox-like. And then on the right there is Casper.js, that adds the sort of the interactivity to it. So does anyone here write JavaScript code? Okay, I see like 4 or 5 hands. Okay, so this is a point at which if you want to use some of these tools, you will be writing some JavaScript. But there are demo files and examples and samples all over that you can use that they'll give you a good place to get started. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is Phantom CSS, which is a Casper module for automating visual regression testing with Phantom.js or Slimer.js and Resemble.js. Resemble.js does similar things to what ImageMagick does. It's what generates the diffs. So I'm going to do now it's something completely different here. And the way I've installed Phantom.js is I cloned it from the repository and I installed the latest development version of Casper, which is required for Phantom CSS. And then because Ruby gets in the way and anytime you type Casper.js, Ruby grabs it and says, oh, you must mean the Ruby version. I actually had to install it separately and create a symlink, and there's probably a better way to handle it, but I was kind of in a hurry. So the command I'm going to run is a little fussy in order to run the Phantom CSS demo. So you could just put Casper.js in your path, and probably you would pick either Wraith or Phantom CSS and not both, and then you wouldn't have this problem. So I'm just going to copy and paste some commands because so what Phantom CSS does is you can do some of the same things you do with Casper, like trap just a selector. And you can also write a script that will interact with the page first. So let me show you that if I have it open. Okay, so Phantom CSS repo comes with a sample JavaScript file that you can use. Most of the stuff here is just sort of housekeeping. The actual stuff that's happening is here where it says the test scenario. You start it, you set the viewport, you take a screenshot, then you click something, you wait for it to appear, then you take another screenshot, then you click another thing and take another screenshot. So this is their sample. And just based on the sample, I'm not like the world's best JavaScript programmer, so whatever. I made my own file based on it, where what I'm doing is I am opening my page, I'm setting the viewport, I am clicking a selector. Now this is a very hairy selector. It's because our mega menu toggles don't have unique IDs. If they did, it would be a little easier. So I'm clicking on something that will open a mega menu. I'm waiting for the submenu to appear. Then I'm taking the screenshot. And then this function down here runs the comparison. So the first time you run it, it'll say, hey, looks like you haven't run this before. We'll save these images as a baseline. And then the next time you run it, it will compare them. So I've already run it more than once. So let me just run it again. And I will copy this command because it's a little bit fussy. Here's what I'm doing. I'm calling my devel version of Casper.js. I'm issuing the test command. I'm telling what JavaScript file to run. And I'm saying use the Slimer.js engine because Slimer.js is better at web fonts than Phantom.js. So I'm going to run it again. Okay, so it says I have a failure. Something changed between my historical page and my current page. So let's take a look. If I nope, that's not the one I want. Okay, well, we'll have that up anyway. I think if I open the... Okay, here's the failure. Here's the diff. I have... here's the current version. Here's the diff. And I will actually open up the original that was saved as well. So here's the original. Here's the latest. And here's the diff. So I did the same thing. I said, just capture the screenshot, and I can see that I used to have a sans serif font here, and now I have a serif font, and this is bolder than it used to be. So this is, you know, we had an initial version of our theme, and we tweaked it to be more in compliance with the brand guidelines, and here's the difference. This is a difference that we intended, but here it is. But I don't know if you notice here, someone with an eagle eye and a familiarity with the brand theme will notice here that this is not the brand font. This is a generic serif font. And this is back to what I said earlier about these fake browsers are not so good with typekit fonts. So, well, that's kind of a problem. What if you want to, like you need to see changes in a typekit font? And that is the point at which we get into running a real browser. So before we start that, does anyone have any questions about Phantom CSS? Okay. So Selenium, does anyone know what Selenium is? Okay, like 5 or 6 people. Does anyone know what BHAT is? 1 or 2. So last year at BDUG, I gave a session about BHAT, which is a behavior-driven development tool that can be used to run automated tests to test the functionality of your website. So we have a suite of tests that we run on our Open Berkeley code. Before we merge anything, we have an automated testing system that says, hey, if there's a pull request on GitHub, it kicks off an automated testing sequence that will see if all of our functionality is still working. And this uses real browsers. We run some tests in Firefox and some tests in Chrome. And we use this with you can do it locally, which I'm going to demonstrate, but we also have a cloud service called Travis CI. CI is for continuous integration, that watches our GitHub repo, and anytime there's a pull request, it kicks off the tests. So because the way we're using Selenium, we're running real browsers with it. Real browsers are okay with the typekit fonts. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this here, which is show me a screenshot of this. So given I'm on the home page and I resize the browser, because you want to be consistent at what widths you're looking at, just so you know you're comparing things that are comparable. Then I click News, which will open the mega menu, and then show me a screenshot. So, okay. So here we are. I'm in my test directory, and I'm going to run this BHAT test. Take a screenshot. And you'll see, since I'm running a real browser, you might actually see it open a Firefox window. Yep, it resizes it, it clicks it, and then it automatically, boop, it opens my my image for me. And now again, if you have pretty good eyesight, you can probably see that that actually is the custom font for Berkeley. This is the Freight font. If you compare it to this one, you can see that while Phantom CSS was not able to render the screenshot, Selenium was. Yes, question.
Somewhat general question, but as you're doing this, what's your process for keeping straight the piles of screenshots that are piling up here? Like, how do I know, do you have any map towards figuring out what you just shot there in retrospect?
Tomorrow
when you look at this, like, like what browser, what condition?
Yeah, well,
generated this thing, how am I going to figure that out?
What I would do is in the in my JavaScript file, you can give it a name. You can tell it where to put it,
Yeah.
and etc. And you can, the names are. Okay, so here's where I give it the name that the file name that's saved under. So you say, take this screenshot of this selector and give it this name. So you could, using some other variables, like let's say you're scripting this so that you have 7 different viewport sizes, I would just have your script name them as well.
Firefox versus Safari.
Yeah, yep. You can do all that stuff. But yeah, you might want to go in and clean them out every once in a while. You could probably script something that when it was done would wipe out the other ones, or only save one version, or blah, whatever. And I think actually, if I run it again, it will save new ones. It'll do _1 or whatever. So you might collect some and then want to clean them up.
Your process.
This is kind of new for all of us, so I won't say that I have a process yet. I just have a couple of commands I run and I look at them. So that is a bit of BHAT integration here. Let me actually bump up the size of this. So there's another fun thing you can do with Selenium, which is that you can take a screenshot of a step only if it's failed. Like you can see here, I'm explicitly telling it to save a screenshot. And then you put that in as a step. So in any test where you wanted to take a screenshot, you could say, take a screenshot, take a screenshot, take a screenshot. But sometimes when you're running a test, like if you have an application that's heavy on the JavaScript or any kind of front-end widgetry, when you're running this, you aren't watching it as it goes. And even if you are, it goes by pretty fast. So what does the screen, why did it fail? Sometimes you get a useful failure message and sometimes you don't. Maybe there's a JavaScript error, maybe it timed out, or maybe the functionality is actually broken. So you can set Selenium using some, relatively basic Selenium functions, have it take a screenshot only after a test that has failed. So I'm going to demonstrate that right now. So this is a test that does that. I have a test that I guaranteed is going to fail, and then it will take a screenshot for me. And I'm not doing the fancy thing where it opens it automatically, because this is the kind of thing that I would probably be doing remotely and headless. And I also have it. So here I've demonstrated, I have a breakpoint here. I can look at it. So I'm saying I'm looking for a text that's not on the page. And obviously it's not there. But all I get is the text is not on the page. Why? I don't know. So if I do which one is it going to be? It's going to be the later one. So here's my screenshot. So it's just saved where I tell it to be saved. And if I set my test running locally and go off to get lunch and I come back, then I will have these screenshots of any step in my whole process that failed, and I can review them. And does anyone want to see the PHP code that makes this work? Okay, maybe not. So part of what that code is doing is that it's giving a name where it has the name of the browser, the date, the time, and a unique identifier. I could also, if I wanted to, change my steps so that it also gave me, useful things like what scenario was I running, what step was I running, and that kind of thing. So that is all pretty cool stuff, but there is more to be done, I would say, that we actually haven't done yet. So the big thing for us next will be integrating it with Travis CI. So Travis CI is the automated cloud system that runs all our functional tests for us. We would also like to have it run visual regression tests. And I could throw this code up on Travis right now and it would work. But the problem is, since Travis is in the cloud, when the test run is finished, the environment that it ran in is wiped along with the screenshots that it saved. So the thing to do it with integration with Travis would be to hook it up to, for example, the Google Drive API and have it post the images somewhere. or you could hook it up to the Box API, or you could have it email them with, or you could use something like Flickr, anything with an API, where you would write your steps so that when the screenshots were taken, they actually got posted somewhere that wasn't going to disappear milliseconds after your test run finished. So that's on our list. We haven't done it yet. We actually need to figure out where do we want to store them, how do we work with the API, credentials, blah, blah. But I think it's going to be worthwhile. There's another part of this, which is that we don't want to just take screenshots as part of our functional tests. We actually want to run some pure visual regression tests. And for that, I wouldn't necessarily just throw random screenshot steps into my functional test scenarios. I would probably use Travis to run a separate set of visual regression tests. And to do that, there are a bunch of options. Browser Stack has a service called Automate, where basically you have your account credentials and they have an API, and you can hook Browser Stack up with some of these continuous integration services and use Browser Stack to run your visual regression tests. Sauce Labs does something similar, and it is very easy, apparently, well, I haven't tried it yet, to hook up with Travis. Shuv is another service that will do this for you. And WebDriver CSS is something that's on top of Selenium, which basically is very similar to Phantom CSS, but it runs as part of Selenium, so you can hook it into your Selenium automation. And resources, these are all, or most of the things I talked about. I think I need to add Shuv to that. Yeah, most of the things I talked about are linked here. There's documentation for everything, and many people are working on this. There are a ton of different choices, but you'll probably find that Phantom CSS or Wraith or WebDriver CSS is what you want to use, and you can just go wild and do it. Or you might just say, hey, I'm just going to Browser Stack myself and clicking on the linkies and make sure it works. So does anyone have any overall questions or questions about the specific technologies? Things you need to do, Brian?
So I'm just trying to imagine, like, you've got, like we've got all our BHAT tests.
Yep.
And then when we make change to, say, our brand theme, we might want to do some diffs.
Yep.
As opposed to just saving screenshots.
Yes.
And so the way that we would, so it looked like basically the way you tell it, what to snap and what to diff is the config file.
Yes.
And so would you be giving Travis a different config file every time, or each time you wanted to add more things to compare, or what would that look like on the integration, on the Travis integration side?
What I would probably do is I would probably update the configuration file when there was something new I wanted to snap, and just have it be, you could have one configuration file for locally and one for Travis, and then just commit the changes to the Travis one and say, and we have a script, Travis has a script that it runs. So just add that to the script. Say, run the functional tests and then run this Wraith command, or if we install Phantom CSS, run this Phantom CSS JavaScript. And so we would, anytime we wanted to snap something new, we would edit the config file. I can't think of, it's possible that we could script it in a way that would automate some of that, but I'm not sure.
And then like the way we can tag BHAT tests and run subsets of BHAT tests.
Yes.
So in order to do something similar, would we need like multiple config files and say like, and run, the script would say like run config file 1, 3, and 5, or run 2, 4, and 6?
The way we have it set up, with, it could all be in the Travis, the BHAT stuff could all be in one config file. We could just use tags. So like you say, and so in the Travis script, it would say run this profile, then run that profile, then run the next profile. And you could say only run the third profile if the first two pass. So for example, if the functional tests pass, do you want to waste time snapping a bunch of screenshots? Maybe not. That kind of thing.
Yeah, but when the difference is when we're dipping screenshots, then we can't do it with BHAT, right?
You would have to have a baseline saved and probably committed to the repo. So if you have a set of baseline screenshots and you commit them to the repo, then you can use that as the basis for your diff. But yes.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
You could do that too. Yeah. So yeah, fetch the latest, run the diff on those. Anybody else have a question?
Would there be, I mean, we're thinking through the process backwards. I mean, I'm reversing
Sure.
the well thought out, carefully planned development track you guys are on. Like, you know, getting a call, the site's broken in Firefox. Like, okay, what does that mean to me as a developer? Like, check Firefox immediately and see, okay, maybe you can't discern what's changed about it. Is there any call for like just having these scripts run daily or weekly? You know, build up a library over time of the browsers that you're most concerned, you know, about.
Sure. Yeah.
And have some reference point. I mean, I'm just trying to discern, like, okay, so we want to figure out what changed and when and how to remedy that. First, you know, get back on the phone with the person, it's like send a screenshot at least.
Yeah.
What you're talking about. Or, you know, what, you know, how could you, what would you, are there other ways to use this besides just development testing that could be useful for us?
Yeah, I think so. You can use.
You could collect the Berkeley homepage for the next year and have a calendar.
You could, yes, yes.
What would be? Would that work? Do you think? Or
yeah, I mean, you would have to script
a
it.
reference library of your, you know, homepage and your news page and your, you know, the important pages. See where it went wrong if something did change. I mean, I guess because you still have to have a designer or developer conversation to say okay, something did change. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that changed?
Right. Yes.
Like,
yes.
You know,
I think.
Somebody still have to figure out that's a bad change.
Yeah, you might if you're taking periodic screenshots automatically, like every week, then you would probably have to be of your live site. Then you'd probably have to be pretty careful about blocking out the dynamic regions, right? So you're going to have different news stories on the homepage every time. You don't want to call that a failure. So you would want to use something, and WebDriver CSS can do this, where you can say, do you hide it? Do you exclude it? Or I forget, there's like 3 things you can do with WebDriver CSS that either you can block it with a big black square, you can hide it, which means don't display the selector and it won't take up any space, or you can say like, it will take up space, but it'll just be empty. We haven't really looked into that yet, but it could be useful. So then you could run your tests every week, but it might be more useful to run them when you have a release and then save those as a baseline. So whenever you update your CSS, you save a baseline. And then you can compare not only the current to a baseline, but you can compare baselines to each other if you have to go digging back in your history. But then you'd have to write a script that would do this on a timed basis or an automated basis, and that's where like some continuous integration stuff would help. Jan? Yes, Selenium can drive any browser. You just have to give it the binary or whatever of the browser and tell it, hey, you know. So we have some of our tests running on Firefox and some run on Chrome. IE might be a little harder, and that's where people tend to bring in things like Sauce Labs or Browser Stack Automate, because then that means you don't have to care about finding the right binary. You just tell Sauce Labs to go do it, and it'll run it on all the different browsers that you tell it to. Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. This is some brand new stuff for all of us. So I hope it was useful or entertaining or some combination thereof for all of you guys.
Great.
All right.